Join me, Buck Woody, and Marisa Matthews as we guide you through the Learning T-SQL modules on Microsoft Learn.
Hey Buck, so I created the database like you showed me in the last video, but what do I do next?
Well, we need to enter some data in our database so we have something to work with. Let's take a look at this script. Now, I've actually already run this, but you can see we created our tables in the last exercise, and we've got a graphical representation of that here. So I'm just going to hide that so we have a little more screen real estate, and we're doing some inserts. Now, I'll show you the event of the insert statement in another lesson. We're not going to do that right now. But essentially, we just say in that table, in these columns, put this data. The things that are important to kind of notice are that anything that's text valued has this little single quote. I've always called it a tick mark. I don't know. I'll use single quote here in our class so we keep it straight. But in between here, we can put any text. And as we made our name attribute, when we made that column, we said that it could take in character data. So that's why you have that little tick. This one's going to be Wales in the UK. Our design showed London, but you subsequently corrected me. Thank you. And then you'll notice we've got our dates and so on that go in, and then numeric data goes in without any ticks. And then we've got some more ticks. And then we do that all over again. Here's the first conference. Here's the next ones. Here's the sessions and so on. So you can see all we're doing here is just adding it in and saving it right here in the script.
And when you say script, what do you mean? Is that something new?
Oh, I'm sorry. No, a script is just the Transact-SQL statements. They're just all saved in a file so you can run them all at once. That's all.
Okay, wait, back up. What is Transact-SQL?
That's a great question. The way you work with data in a relational database, like SQL Server is one kind, is to send commands to it. The first versions of these databases that were made a long time ago when I was younger, were used something called the structured query language, or some people say SQL, some people say SQL. When vendors like Microsoft came along, they added commands that do even more cool things with their relational engine. And that dialect of SQL from Microsoft is called Transact-SQL, or most people just say T-SQL. Now, T-SQL is a declarative language, and that just means you code what you want the system to do, and the system will figure out how to do it. We said create a table. We didn't go into the hard drive and memory and all that. We just said create a table, and we let it figure out what to do. That's called a declarative language. Now, the next important point is that T-SQL works with a relational database. And the relational part actually means relations or tables, not relationships. Now, we're going to come to all that in a bit, but it basically means that we're working with set theory. Don't roll your eyes like that. Remember the interlocking circles from school, A, B, and C, and the joins? We're going to do that same kind of thing here, but using commands. We learn about joins, you'll hear a lot more about those interlocking circles.
So this is just working with data, but using commands. Okay, I think I got that part.
Yeah, I mean, this is a great opportunity to take a look at the groupings of those commands. So there's T-SQL commands, but they kind of fall into groups. Some of those commands go into sort of families. When you create new database objects, like our tables, or when you change them, those commands are called data definition language statements, or DDL, still Transact-SQL. When you work with the data in the tables, that's called data manipulation language, or DML, still Transact-SQL. And when you work with permissions and rights, which we'll come to later, on those objects and the data, those are called data control language, or DCL. They're all T-SQL commands. It's just what you're using them for.
Oh, okay.
So let's take a look at one of the most powerful parts of T-SQL, the select statement. Now, the select statement just retrieves data from the system. It's the basic way that you ask for what you want. At its most basic, you just say select something. And by the way, you're going to see we add a little semicolon thing there, and we'll talk about that in a moment. For instance, here, I'll come over here to the screen. Let me just get rid of this, and I'm just going to paste in a query here, right there. Allow. Select Marisa. Now notice I've got ticks around that. So when I run this, what you'll see happens when I say, oh, I only selected one part of it. There we go. That's another thing you need to know. If you select a part, it'll just try to run that one part. But you see what we get back is the word Marisa. I'm adding that semicolon there, by the way, to signify we're done with the statement. You might also see the word go. And that means just keep all these statements together as a group. There's something they call a transaction. Now, nothing happened until I sent that command to the engine. But once I did, we got a result.
Well, I mean, this is all interesting. It's not really useful though, is it? I mean, I want to work with my data, just not print stuff on the screen.
All right. Okay. Fair enough. Let's go back to the screen. I'll put something better in here. Select name from people. Now, what is happening here? The name part tells T-SQL we want the name column or attribute. The from part tells the system where to find it. Note that this time there's no tick marks, meaning I want an attribute, not a text value. Let's click that. We get a run. And now what we're going to get back is all of the people we inserted: Buck Woody, Marisa Matthews, and Jane Doe. The interesting thing is that we took the select command, the select tick Marisa, and we just added to that to build the query of what we want. That is so important. In fact, that's what we'll do for the rest of this series. We'll just build on statements that we learn.
Okay, so I mean, I saw you put my name in the database, but what if I want to just see that one name?
Yeah, so let's continue to build on the select statement. So here, let me just change this. And I've added something this time. We're still selecting name from people. You already saw how to do that. But we've added a where. And we said where that name equals Marisa Matthews. And we've got our little semicolon to stop the statement after it's done. And there we see just Marisa Matthews. Now, with just these three parts of T-SQL, you could find out all the speakers in the database, show their names, and so on. How would we do that if it's just the speakers we want?
Let's see. So would that be select name?
Right. Let me type
from
yeah. Okay.
People.
Right.
Where type equals single quote speaker, single quote semicolon?
Yeah, that's exactly right. That works. I'm going to add some brackets. Type, the word type is actually used in the Transact-SQL language, and we made it a column name. So to make sure that T-SQL knows that we're using it as a column name, I've got these little brackets. So let's see if your query runs, and if we got that right, and we should come back with only two people, Marisa and Buck. It's just as simple as building what you want as you want it. That's the declarative aspect I mentioned earlier.
Well, that's pretty interesting.
Yeah. You'll recall that when we created our tables, we named the columns or attributes, but we also added something next to them. Those are data types, and they make sure the design of the database enforces what goes in the columns. For instance, you could add a date in a spreadsheet as text, but it wouldn't be treated as a date unless you set it that way. So if you wanted to find the number of months between two dates, you have to make sure you set that up. In Transact-SQL, we use data types to make sure the data is clean, consistent, and reliable. We try to put text in a number field, it just won't work. Notice also I've been putting those little ticks or single quote marks around some values and not others. For numeric or Boolean values, Boolean is like true and false. You don't need to put the little tick marks. But for character and date and time values and so on, you do that. The documentation goes into more detail about those data types.
Okay, I'll be sure to look up a few things then.
Okay. There is, however, one concept in a database that doesn't really transfer well when we think about spreadsheets. And the concept is called a null, N-U-L-L. This is something that takes a value in a column when we don't know what to put there. It isn't blank. and it isn't nothing. It's more of a placeholder. Set theory doesn't allow for blanks. You remember our circles, there was nothing blank there. You had something there or you didn't. So a null value is just kind of a placeholder that says, I don't know what goes here, if anything. Where this becomes interesting is when we want to query a null or whether we want to allow them or not. And we'll see how to handle that a little later on. The key concept here is that you can set a column to allow null values or not. Perhaps you want to make sure someone always enters an email for a person. If you set that email column to not null, then it must have a value or the data won't go in. It'll fail everything and won't let you put in. One more thing. When we created our database at the start, we just put all the tables in kind of a default location, and that location is called a schema. You can, if you want, collect them into something that they call a schema. The process is really simple. You send the command create schema, give it a name, and then when you add objects, you just put a period after the schema name and then the objects. And then that'll allow you to group things like finance or operations or East region or whatever else you want to group them in. For our simple database, I'm going to leave them at the default, which is a schema that's actually already there called DBO or database owner.
Okay, well, I think I have enough now to get this started.
Okay, great.